Hi everyone, thanks for joining me. Today I want to think a bit more about thinking errors. So thinking errors are ways or patterns of thinking that seem to be around when we're feeling stressed out or depressed. And they are in fact quite recognizable. They have an extreme quality to them, so they're characterized by quite strong emotions, and yet at the same time they're often quite simplistic ways of seeing things. So everything is either brilliant or it's a disaster, or if it's a person, they're great, they're best mate, or we're never going to speak to them again. We know when we're feeling better and more robust that actually life is usually lived in the grey. It's a bit of one thing, a bit of another, and we can think in this more complex way. But as I say, when we're under pressure, we fall into these particular patterns of thinking, and they can, have quite an effect and make life quite difficult. So worth trying to get hold of them, recognize what's going on, and try and think in a more, in a better, more helpful way. So maybe it's better to bring an example. So somebody in a session last week brought an example of something that happened to them, and they've kindly said, I can use it here. Let's call this guy Nick. Nick had made a mistake at work. He'd forgotten something. There was a bit of a mini crisis. His boss wasn't happy, and Nick was completely stressed out by this and brought it to therapy. I think he knew that his reaction to what had happened was out of proportion with the importance of it, but he just couldn't seem to process it in any other way. Now, when we looked last time at thinking errors, I think we looked at catastrophizing, black and white thinking, and mind reading. And obviously those three would be around here, but today I want to look at three slightly different ones. So the first one would be demands on self. So demands on self are things that we say to ourselves about how we have to be, how we have to function. So the demand on self here for Nick was, you have to get things right all the time. There's no room for mistakes. It's a sort of rigid requirement, you could call it a sort of perfectionism. And in fact, for Nick, it wasn't just in his work life, although perhaps more apparent there, it was also in his kind of social life. So he had to be funny guy, or interesting, and life at the party, and in his relationship, he had to be the big romantic, had to get everything right there, and he had to have the most Facebook friends. Whatever you looked at, this was going on. And actually, like a lot of psychological things, it had actually served him quite well. So he pushed himself to do a good job in all these different contexts of his life, and he'd done well at school, and he had a good circle of friends. But as you get older, perhaps you become a little bit more extreme, and this was happening to him. He was finding himself under a lot of pressure. This was an impossible standard that he had to live up to in his life. And I think when you don't make many mistakes, and he wasn't, then the fear of mistakes also gets bigger, and the pressure ratchets up. Your life is based on the fact that you're the guy who doesn't make mistakes. Or if you do make mistakes, as we all must, they get denied, or you may come up with crazy excuses, or push those mistakes onto other people, and that's obviously not going to make you popular. So the thinking error that's going on here is demands on self. So important to recognize that. What is the the actual thought here? I have to get things right all the time. What would be the realistic thought? It might be something more like, well, I'd like to get things right all the time, or I try to get things right all the time, but qualified. No one gets things right all the time. And in fact, we learn from our mistakes. Getting things wrong is part of being human, part of the human experience. And if you can then try to bring that attitude towards your mistake into focus, then I think that's going to lead to a different experience. You're not going to feel that the whole thing's so disastrous. You're not going to be running around just desperately trying to fix everything. You're just going to be more like, well, okay, I did my best, but I've slipped up here, I can't get it right all the time, and you know what? It's not the end of the world. I'll just kind of come back from it and learn from it, and I won't make that mistake again. So you just all in all got a much better way of handling things. Your anxiety levels are down. I think other people are probably less stressed around you, and it's all good. So other thinking errors that might have been going on here, well, magnifying, minimizing. So thinking of that as one thing, it's as if you see events through a powerful lens. So magnifying is obviously you're looking at the thing. Here it says forgetting to do something, and it just looks much bigger than it should be. It's literally sort of filling the screen, and it feels like it's the only thing that matters. So you think about a lens like a telescope, it's something that distorts. So these are ways of experiencing things that are unrealistic. It's unnecessarily big, and that, as I said, is going to drive unhelpful reactions, defensiveness or denials or meltdowns, which is what Nick was heading towards. And maybe this was around with some of his earlier work things, which, as I say, even though he had these star moments, there was also something that wasn't quite working as well as it could have. Minimizing would be the opposite. So when you do things well, you, instead of seeing them as good outcomes and banking that and thinking, well, okay, I did that, which obviously then gives you something to balance against things when you make mistakes. They're just overlooked and discounted. Well, anyone can do that, that's obvious, means nothing. So again, your sense of your abilities is distorted. Now, magnifying and minimizing can also go on in respect of other people, but the lens seems to work exactly the opposite way. So when they do something, you see it as, wow, that's amazing, they did really well. Maybe in a competitive environment like a workplace, you might feel a bit sort of that was putting you under pressure. And conversely, when somebody gets something wrong, well, you don't see that as a mistake, you just completely overlook it for them. So you're basically doing for them what you should do for yourself, yet in terms of the comparison, you're turning that lens around the other way and making life very difficult. So the final one I want to look at today is labeling, which is a thinking error that would follow from these sorts of other thinking errors, and that's where we take the experience and we see it not just as a one-off, but as some sort of global judgment. So not, oh, I failed to do that task as well as I could have, but I am a failure. Or, somebody has a go at you or makes a joke about you, not, oh, well, they had a bit of a dig, I guess I had that coming, but, I'm a joke, or, that's what they're all thinking. It just turns you into something which I think is just not justified by the situation. So again, it's the mind's tendency to go for these big, simplistic conclusions, shot through with anxiety, rather than working with complexity and with a better sense of proportion. Is this sounding familiar? I mean, if this is going on, these sorts of things are going on in different contexts in your life, then this is, I think, an important thing to be doing, to learning about thinking errors. They're quite straightforward. There's not even that many of them. Then being able to apply them to the situation, think what the thought is, think what the error is, remind yourself what the realistic thought is, just step back, try and approach things in a more balanced, nuanced, complex sort of way, and then bring that into the situation. Now for Nick, he's been doing that, and I think I hope he's going to do it successfully. I've only seen him once since, but he's said that he's starting to be able to not just do that after the event and think back, well, what did I do? What was the thinking error? What was the realistic thought? He's actually getting that sort of moment where he can just sort of stop himself, actually at the time. Anxiety levels go down, has a much better outcome, and everything is good. So try this for yourself, and I hope to see you at the next one. If you like this, please give me a thumbs up, and otherwise, see you next time. Bye for now.